All right, I'm going to go ahead and call this work session on AO 2019-109. I don't feel like yelling. On AO 2019-109 on mayoral appointment confirmation hearings. Let's go ahead and start with introductions, starting with everyone at the child line. So for the recording, that was Meg Zalatow, Crystal Kennedy, and John Weddleton. We'll go ahead, I'll start and we'll go around. Felix Rivera.
Pete Peterson.
Fred Dyson.
Dean Gates. Johnson.
So the ordinance we have before us is one sponsored by myself and by Vice Chair LaFrance. It's a simple ordinance to put into code an automatic process to handle certain principal executive appointees, and still allows for the Assembly to hold a confirmation hearing for all other appointees as requested. This, as the AM details, we have at times had to postpone appointments because we want to have an executive confirmation hearing. And we did that at the last meeting. We postponed an appointment for executive for a relatively important department of ours. So this helps automatically put that process into place as an additional item for the clerk to comply with, an additional duty. With that, I don't know, Dean, if you want to walk through it, and then we'll see if we have any questions, but it's pretty simple.
Sure, thanks, Mr. Chair. Although I think you covered it really well already. So I guess just walking through what each section does. The ordinance section 1, it amends a code section that has a long list of the clerk's regular duties. This is so that this duty to receive an AM that says confirmation hearing on it is scheduled for a work session for the confirmation hearing automatically. So Mrs. Jones won't miss it, but future clerks and they'll always see that it's a duty here in code. Section 2 is adding a new section which simply says that it describes the process sort of in quick style fashion, which works really well for the clerk. And it says whenever an AM is received for the agenda that has this title, I guess on the page, top of page 2, it's directing that the AM title should say executive appointment - confirmation. So anytime the clerk sees that, they automatically go to subsection B and schedule it. And also in A2 at line 3 on page 2, anytime the Assembly requests that a confirmation hearing for any appointee be scheduled, that the clerk schedule it. And that's important because we're making an automatic process, not for every single confirmation the Assembly votes on, but only for some of the top positions in the executive department heads and principal executives, and we listed those in the next section 3 in code. But the Assembly also confirms board and commission appointments, and there's a lot of them. And so I don't think we want an automatic confirmation hearings scheduled for every single one, but we also don't want that to be like missed. The Assembly does have the right to, if there's some controversial appointment to the Planning Zoning Commission Board of Adjustment, to pull it and from the consent agenda and say want to schedule confirmation hearing, and that's why A2 was important to include this new section. So subsection B is simply scheduling and timeline for scheduling confirmation hearing, and I selected that I shall be occurring no more. Set it on the regular meeting agenda after a confirmation hearing. More than 24 days after the date that the AM is forwarded to the clerk. And that timeline is just to explain the 24-day number of agenda items that are required today and noon for the 24th meeting, 11 days before the Assembly meeting to be on the regular agenda. And then 14 days is usually the amount of time we have between each Assembly meeting, 2 weeks apart. And so 14 days plus 11 in order to receive the documents in the clerk's office. And then have a confirmation hearing on the next regular meeting, but 2 meetings away. So the clerk will put it on a meeting agenda more than 24 days after she receives it. but the intent is to allow for that confirmation hearing to occur upon enough time for it to occur. For some regular meeting agenda. Subsection 3 adds the subsection D to the personnel rules, section 330.73 about recruitment and appointment. This is in the executive's article of the personnel rules, and in B we've listed 1 and 2 the positions that are affected by this ordinance, and it requires the HR director to, I guess, see these positions anytime they are to, in some section C, send the AM a specific subject line, executive appointment confirmation hearings, and I passed this through the NS and the HR director and sponsors review this, and they'll get the municipal clerk. They all said that this would work fine, so we got, I guess, the asking for support from the various affected departments and individuals.
Great, thank you, Mr. Gates. Mr. Reynolds.
I wonder, going from administration here, but so someone's appointed, and then sometime in 10 days they send a memo to Barbara, and then nothing can happen for us for more than 24 days. So it's over a month that this person's hanging there. Do I really have a job? And I would think at some point it makes it harder to get people to fill those positions. I have to quit some jobs. When they get appointed, do they start then, or do they stay at their old job? I mean, what happens logistically? No one knows. We don't know, Alex. What happened to you? You did that.
And I think it's a point of legal contention, but it was my understanding that when I was appointed by the mayor, I got the job, and whether it's actually a requirement that it gets assembly approval or not is, I think, a point of discussion. But I acted under the assumption that I had the job and that the approval was a process that had to be gone through. Kent, for example, the person we're talking about, is actually in the job doing his job.
Dean, what happened? Can we say, no, we don't like the guy or gal, that then they have to go away?
Yeah, you can. Every appointment that is requires assembly confirmation, and as Mr. Slivka said, they're appointed, they start working, but it's subject to confirmation in the assembly. So at that point, we have the vote to confirm this person in this position. If you vote them down, then they're out of that job, I guess, from that point forward, perhaps the next day, or the reasonable time frame to clear out. I think, I can't recall if that's ever happened, but I would assume it would be the next day they would just have to clear out their office. But as Mr. Slivka said, when the mayor appoints, they have the job at that point. It's just subject to possible confirmation or not. So, and it's an interesting feature of the confirmation power of the legislative branch. It's actually an executive function, and it's the legislative branch's involvement in an executive branch function. It's very different from the other sense of separation of powers, and so it's a little unique. In the state context, they have language in their statutes about interim appointments, actually in the Alaska Constitution, for appointments by the governor that are made while the legislature's in recess, and they're in recess for the majority of the year. So that those appointees are interim until the legislature convenes, and then we can have a confirmation process of them. But we don't have that issue here at the local level because you guys meet every 2 weeks throughout the year, so we don't have that need for a whole interim process. But the reality, the practical, I guess, necessity, and the legal status is the mayor confirms that you start working at that position. I don't know, sorry to go a little more into that answer.
Oh, no problem, Mr. Gates. So to add on to that a little bit before I get to Ms. Salatel, I would contend that it is, although there may be, I guess, some legal dispute there, that the Assembly does have the power up or down vote power. And the state legislature recently used that power, right, to deny a confirmation. So I don't see why that wouldn't be the case on the local level. Ms. Elton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to get some context for the 24 days, what's the notice time that we have to give before we can take action on a confirmation, or I'm sorry, on an appointment?
There's no established timeline right now in current code. It just says that the mayor appoints subject to confirmation by the assembly. And this 24 days, it's clarified what Mr. Weddington said. It's not 24 days after it's at the Tuesday night meeting agenda. It's the clerk receives this item, and normally the clerk will receive it like today to put on the 24th agenda. This process says don't put it on the 24th. You put it on the meeting 24 days after today's date, and she might receive a confirmation memo, and that would be the October 8th meeting. So it wouldn't be more than a month. It's 24 days from the date the clerk receives the memo appointing someone. So I guess the work session could be any time. Could be, I guess, to use my example, the name was received today, between today and October 8th. And working with the chair to schedule the work session dates and so forth.
Thank you, Ms. Elton. Mr. Constant.
Thank you. I'm sorry I missed the first part of this discussion. There are several sections here that are existing code, right? You're just adding, whereas section 2 new.
Yes. Section 2 is a new of section 1.
Oh.
Okay, so I'm curious then,
So
under
that's all we
part G of that, I understand there's what the gist of this process is to ensure that the administration understands and encodes the process to get us a confirmation hearing. But couldn't we avoid all this 24 days and all the timelines and instead just mandate that the process happens? And then, because we just had to correct a section of the code because the term regular meeting was in there, and that term screwed up our proceedings for other important matters, and so we took the word regular out to allow it to be a meeting. So couldn't we simply set it on a meeting agenda for action? I don't understand why we have to wait 24 days and why it has to be a regular meeting. I think that we should reserve maximum flexibility to ourselves to set a special meeting and get this done instead of mandating these cumbersome timeframes that might in some cases be great, but in some other cases might really not serve us for the need that we have. And so I would suggest we at least consider a more flexible path to encode the requirement, but at the same time not bind ourselves to artificial timelines.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. We'll consider that, Suzanne and I. Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, thank you. So, what have I been here? 30 months or something. And I don't think we've challenged any appointments. And Pete and I are used to an environment where the candidate would go before a relevant committee. And there's some of these could be done that way. But I would suggest that we change the code to allow for waiving the confirmation hearing if there's no objection from the assembly. So we all say, hey, this was a slam dunk. The guy's been working for Public Works for the last 12 years. And we choose to waive it so that we deal with these on a kind of an exception basis. You just go around the room. A carpenter or an electrician in our city makes $40 an hour. But some of us might be worth that much an hour, but just count the time plus our staff, and I think we have more important things to do. So, and indeed, if one of us has a problem, they can go and meet with the person and so on. So I'd like us to have the flexibility to not do this, even though I enjoy your company.
Thank you, me too. So, actually, Mr. Gates, I'm curious, is that flexibility already in this ordinance could the chair say, the clerk would say, okay, I'm scheduling this work session on this confirmation hearing, and can the chair say, no, actually, we don't need that confirmation hearing?
I'm looking at this in subsection B2 on page 2. It says the receipt clerk shall set a confirmation hearing. I think to add the flexibility that Mr. Dyson talked about is to perhaps change that to say the municipal clerk may set a confirmation hearing in consultation with the chair and so forth. And I think that would provide a little more flexibility.
Yeah, so it's just my old song here. Look around the room. There's nobody here with cows in their hands. Nobody a member of a union. Nobody here that's punching a clock. I don't think. And we just the amount of meetings we have.
Suzanne wants to know for the record that she has calluses.
I have calluses.
I have calluses.
All right.
All right, Mr.
Oh,
Dyson.
guitar
It is
helps.
enough.
But we structure this so it makes it very difficult for a person with a non-business professional to be a part of the team. We lose them. Into nagging a crabby old man.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. So much I can say. Mr. Weddleton.
I think I'm good.
All right, thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Jones is not here, and maybe, did she have some input into this as to why the 24 days is in here? Maybe Dean can fill us in on
Yes,
that.
I consulted with Ms. Jones after I drafted this and pointed out specifically that timeline, 24 days. And she reviewed the document and emailed me back that it looked good. It added a good to the clerk that can manage it. She didn't have any other comments.
And I was thinking about maybe putting in a form of amendment this way, where it's something that's just, organize a hearing as quickly as practicable or something, so we don't leave someone whose career is sort of in limbo, hanging out there for any longer a period of time than necessary. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll definitely look into that for your suggestion and Mr. Constant's suggestion. Mr. Constant.
Yeah, maybe the 24 days is 10 days plus 2 days between meetings. That's 24 days. But I don't know if we were to come up with the waiving process that I would want it to be just the chair's discretion. Because then you could come into a scenario where the chair excuses a process where a majority of folks wanted to have it. And so I'm not sure what a middle road would be if we were going to create a waiver that would allow open meetings rules being honored, not having a predisposed conversation. But there should be some thought put into a way to make that happen without having just one person be the arbiter.
Isn't there's a system that we can override the chair?
6 of you guys, yeah.
Again, but that would add 2 weeks to the process because the person has been excused off of the agenda, right? And so this is one of those very interesting areas that has a slightly parliamentary challenge.
Okay. Yeah, Ms. Alton.
Thank you. I'm trying to reconcile the process because I'm still new at this, but we typically get these in the appointments as consent agenda, and then we have confirmation hearing, and then it's before the full body and a subsequent meeting. Is there a way to simply have the clerk set this so that it, upon receipt, it goes into the consent agenda items? Because that's actually going to dictate the timeline. That's what I guess I was asking about in terms of public notice for hearing and the like is that is, I think that gets us to 24 or more days. If it's regular meetings versus if we have special meetings.
And just a quick note, if I might, just to be really clear, confirmation hearings aren't public hearings, and there's a reason for that. We don't open up our confirmation hearings for the public to come and tell us how bad these people are. They can do that by email. And so I just want to be really clear, that's an HR function that we have, and we do that in the open, but it's just on our agenda. And so just to be real nuanced there.
I guess maybe I used wrong terminology, that we have it and come back before us as public item to have before us. And so that would possibly dictate part of that timeline if we
Mr. Gates, did you have something?
Yeah, I want to compare the current process we have to what this does. Currently, you will see these appointments by an AM on consent agenda under the 9Bs. And I guess if you're talking about voting to have confirmation hearing or not, that's a whole body. Well, that's the current process you have. It would either be voted on the consent agenda and appointed that way, or pulled and a vote request to postpone so that we can have confirmation hearings and so forth. And this process is intended to be different, so it's automatically setting confirmation hearings to select a number of executive appointments. If you want the body to decide to waive a confirmation hearing or hold one, then you might just stick the status quo at present. So I was asked to drop the process, it would be automatic. It might be that you just don't show up for the work session, you know, if you don't have no objections to that point.
And I guess my only comment to that, and I'll speak for myself, and if Ms. LaFrance wants to chime in, she can, but I think the reason the two of us worked on this is that we felt that the current process is somewhat cumbersome. And so more alignment and streamlining of the process, I think, is beneficial for us, so that we don't have to spend time at the meeting pulling it, talking about it, we can just make it automatic. But I understand that there are other considerations to take into account. Mr. Constant.
Well, I would just offer, I agree with the intent, but it's also that there have been a number of times where this might just have been issues of timing, or I'm not sure where there was an assumption there wasn't going to be here, not by us, but by the administration. And I think what we're really doing here, that's to me the most important thing, is establishing for certain positions there will be a hearing. Right? The procedure to get there is not so important to me as long as it's timely and respectful of the time of the people we're conferring, and also we can do it. But it's that it's clear in the code that this hearing will happen, that it's not an option, and it's not a, you know, that to me is one of the important pieces of this legislation.
Absolutely. Yeah, Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I agree with both of you. I think that's very important to point out if we have that is twofold, to make it less cumbersome and to make sure that we retain that piece of control and oversight.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. France. All right, seeing, yeah.
Let's just say, I want to underscore the point I made, that you have the authority to poll us and say, do we really need to have this one? You know, and to err on the side of doing it. And, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Daisy. All right, so I
have a
don't.
question. Do you have the ability to poll us on a question that's substantive on the agenda? The clerk can, I would assume.
Right.
You know, it just gets real fuzzy in there.
Yeah, so that's something that we'll explore with the subcommittee.
You could say, does anyone object to us waiving the meeting? That might be more legal.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you both. All right, so with that, I think I'll go ahead and close this one, and we'll move on to the next one.